Most people misunderstand how military power actually works, and that misunderstanding becomes especially obvious when they look at Latin America. They imagine tanks rolling, jets flying, and flags changing overnight. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If the United States ever decided to use force anywhere in Latin America, the fighting itself would be the easy part. The real problem would begin the morning after, when the shooting stops and someone has to manage what's left behind. Hi, I'm Mark. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your name and city in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me make more interesting content. Now, let's get back to the topic. The United States occupies a unique position in human history. It isn't just the strongest military today, or even the strongest military of the modern era. It is, by every measurable standard, the most powerful military force ever assembled. That power doesn't come from having more soldiers or better weapons alone. It comes from something far less visible, but far more decisive: logistics. For over a century, the United States has built systems designed to move men, equipment, fuel, food, and information across oceans at scale. When Washington considers a military action, distance is almost irrelevant. Whether the target is next door or halfway across the world, the question is never whether the US can get there, but how quickly. When you look at Latin America through that lens, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Latin American militaries are not built for external deployment. They are not designed to project power beyond their borders, let alone sustain operations overseas. This is not a failure of planning or ambition. It is the result of economic reality. Power projection requires an industrial economy with surplus capacity, advanced technology, and a trade system strong enough to support non-productive assets like aircraft carriers and overseas bases. Most countries simply cannot afford that kind of military architecture, and Latin America is no exception. History shows that when a small number of societies gain an industrial and technological edge, the gap becomes overwhelming. The British Empire learned this early. Industrialization allowed Britain to dominate global trade routes and impose its will on regions that lacked comparable technology. It wasn't that Britain was inherently smarter or more disciplined, it was that it entered conflicts with tools no one else possessed. For centuries, Anglo-American powers maintained this advantage, effectively shaping global order while others struggled to catch up. Only in the last few decades have countries like Russia and China narrowed that gap. Latin America, however, never did. The divide became even more pronounced with the digital transformation of warfare. Beginning in the late Cold War and fully revealed during the Gulf War in 1991, the United States demonstrated a new way of fighting. Precision-guided munitions, satellite intelligence, real-time communication, and integrated command systems allowed American forces to dismantle enemy leadership structures almost immediately. Wars were no longer contests of attrition, but exercises in systemic collapse. Latin American militaries never developed anything close to this capability, not because they failed to try, but because their economic and institutional foundations could not support it. If the United States were to engage any Latin American country militarily, or even multiple countries simultaneously, the conventional phase of combat would be short. The outcome would not be in doubt. Command and control systems would collapse quickly, infrastructure would be neutralized, and organized resistance would end within days. Casualties on the American side would be minimal. From a purely military standpoint, it would not be a fair fight. But wars are not judged solely by how they begin. They are judged by what follows. Latin America's geography makes post-war control extraordinarily difficult. Unlike Europe or North America, the region lacks broad, interconnected plains linked by navigable rivers. Instead, it is defined by mountain ranges, dense jungles, extreme climates, and fragmented terrain. Population centers developed in isolation, often at high elevations to escape disease and humidity. This created societies that are physically and culturally disconnected from one another. Moving people, goods, or troops internally is expensive, slow, and unreliable. These conditions prevent the emergence of highly centralized states capable of projecting authority evenly across their territory. Because conventional warfare is so difficult under these conditions, Latin America evolved a different model of conflict. Instead of large standing armies designed to fight peer states, the region developed paramilitary forces suited to internal struggles. Guerrilla groups, militias, criminal organizations, and insurgent movements became the dominant security challenge. These forces thrive in terrain where centralized control is weak and state presence is limited. As a result, many Latin American countries have paramilitary structures that are disproportionately large compared to their conventional militaries. This explains why the region has seen so few traditional interstate wars. Modern conflicts between Latin American states are rare, brief, and limited in scale. Countries simply cannot reach each other effectively, and even when they can, sustaining operations is nearly impossible. Instead, violence turns inward. Colombia's decades-long civil conflict was not an anomaly, but a product of geography and economic fragmentation. Brazil's struggles to assert authority in the Amazon follow the same pattern. These are not failures of will, they are structural constraints. When external powers intervene in such environments, they often underestimate the complexity of what follows. Removing a government is straightforward. Governing a fragmented society is not. The United States learned this painfully in Iraq and Afghanistan, where dismantling existing power structures created vacuums that took years to fill. In Latin America, the challenge can be even greater. In some countries, elites have already fled or been dismantled. Administrative capacity is gone. Institutional memory has evaporated. When an outside force arrives, there is no local system capable of absorbing authority or rebuilding governance from within. This creates a dangerous interface between brittle systems. On one side, a powerful external actor accustomed to efficiency and centralized control. On the other, a fragmented society with weak institutions and deep internal divisions. The result is instability, not order. Some countries offer partial exceptions. Colombia retains a relatively robust elite structure. Brazil's economic oligarchs provide continuity, even amid political chaos. These systems can sometimes interface with external influence, but they are the exception rather than the rule. The broader strategic direction of the United States adds another layer of complexity. During the Cold War, American involvement in Latin America was largely ideological, aimed at countering Soviet influence by supporting friendly regimes. Today, the motivation appears increasingly economic. The emerging approach resembles the late 19th century practice known as dollar diplomacy, where military force was used not to govern directly, but to enforce economic arrangements favorable to American interests. This strategy is inherently unstable. It requires dismantling institutions abroad while simultaneously building new enforcement mechanisms at home that bypass traditional rule of law. For decades, American corporations have operated under the assumption that global legal norms protect their interests. Dollar diplomacy assumes those norms do not exist and must be enforced through power rather than law. This represents a profound shift, one for which neither the US government nor its private sector appears fully prepared. Managing such a system requires long-term commitment, institutional capacity, and a willingness to accept ongoing instability. Ultimately, the question is not whether the United States can dominate Latin America militarily. It unquestionably can. The real question is whether it understands the terrain it is entering, not just geographically, but socially, economically, and institutionally. The battlefield may be easy. The aftermath is not. And history suggests that it is the aftermath, not the invasion, that defines success or failure in the long run.